Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. One of our old school associates is up from California, Mr. Lanny Swerdlow. Hey, Lanny, welcome to the show.
Glad to be back, Paul.
Glad to have you back. There you are. And so you helped start the show. You did start the show.
I named the show.
You named the show and you came up with our slogan.
You came to me and you said you wanted me to do a TV show, and so I put it together.
Right, and here we are, 23 years later.
Show number 993.
Show number 993.
Unbelievable.
So we'll be talking to Lanny a little bit more, and we have our hemp news segment. Lots of stuff going on in the past week, and some videos from the old days. Stay tuned as we bring out the infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from Salem, Oregon. Democratic Governor Kate Brown has signed legislation aptly numbered Senate Bill 420, Oregon Senate Bill 420, to facilitate the expungement of marijuana convictions. We're having some technical difficulties. The measure establishes procedures for persons previously found guilty of low-level, up to 1 ounce, marijuana possession offenses to file a motion with the court to have their convictions set aside. Petitioners may not be charged a fee for submitting such a request, and any objections to the request must be filed within 30 days. The proposal expands upon prior legislation enacted in 2015, which sought to make it easier for those with past marijuana convictions to have their records expunged. The law takes effect on January 1st, 2020. The policy is similar to marijuana-related expungement laws recently enacted in a number of states, including Colorado, Delaware, Massachusetts, Nevada, Rhode Island, and Washington. California law automatically expunges past marijuana convictions. Earlier this month, Governor Brown signed legislation, Senate Bill 970, prohibiting landlords from taking discriminatory action against those who either use medical cannabis or possess cannabis-related convictions. The governor also signed Senate Bill 582, which seeks to authorize Oregon to enter into agreements with regard to exporting cannabis to other states. The latter bill is in response to reports that licensed cultivators in the state have a surplus of marijuana. Yesterday, Oregon Senator Ron Wyden and Congressman Earl Blumenauer introduced legislation to allow for interstate commerce in the United States Congress when it comes to state-to-state legal cannabis programs. Interstate commerce is good for both patients and consumers, as it will decrease the amount of time it takes for recently enacted medical programs to see these products on their shelves, and increase the variety of consumer options in both adult use and medical marijuana marketplaces. Just as Americans around the country enjoy Kentucky bourbon, so they should be allowed to enjoy Oregon cannabis. In short, it's the future, and Congress ought not deny it. Wyden and Blumenauer's State Cannabis Commerce Act would make these existing protections permanent and expand them to include all cannabis producers and consumers in compliance with state law. The legislation would also protect producers or consumers who transport cannabis between cannabis legal states, provided that both cannabis have legal cannabis programs and both states affirmatively agree to the transportation. Oregon Senator Wyden said, quote, "As more and more states legalize cannabis, the gap between state and federal law will only grow more confusing for both legal businesses and consumers." The solution is clear. The federal government needs to end its senseless and out-of-touch prohibition. As we fight for that ultimate goal, however, Congress can and should immediately act to protect the will of Oregonians and voters in other states from federal interference, and that should include interstate cannabis commerce, end quote. Congressman Blumenauer said, quote, the Federal Interstate Cannabis Commerce Act should pass, and the federal government is hopelessly out of touch with the American people on cannabis. Last week, the House agreed and passed Blumenauer's amendment to forbid the federal government from interfering with cannabis programs in states, the District of Columbia, and tribal communities. This week, we're turning to a top priority for Oregonians, allowing for interstate sale of cannabis. It's past time we protect the states like Oregon that have gotten it right, end quote. That's what Congressman Blumenauer said. Our next story is also from Washington, D.C. The United States Department of Agriculture is aiming to finalize regulations governing the licensed production of industrial hemp by this August, according to a notice filed this week in the Federal Register and first reported by Marijuana Moment. The USDA notice emphasizes that such regulations must be in place in order to facilitate commercial hemp cultivation in a manner that's compliant with the provisions of the 2018 Farm Act. Under those provisions, states that wish to license commercial hemp cultivation must submit their plan to the USDA. However, the agency is not reviewing any state-specific plans until it has finalized its own federal regulations. The agency had previously announced its intent to have regulations in place prior to 2020. In December, Congress enacted legislation removing industrial hemp, defined as cannabis containing less than 0.3% THC, and byproducts containing cannabinoids derived from hemp from the Federal Controlled Substances Act. In our next story, Washington regulators lifted a ban on signs referring to state-licensed marijuana businesses at the Seattle Hemp Fest, the massive summer protestival that's been held in Seattle every summer for the last 27 years. The decision by the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Control Board came 3 weeks after HempFest, and two cannabis retailers filed a lawsuit arguing that the ban violated their right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition for redress of grievances under both the First Amendment and the state constitution. The Seattle Times reports that the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Control Board consulted with the State Attorney General's office before announcing that HempFest sponsors may, as usual, display their names and distribute information at the event, provided they themselves or limit themselves to non-commercial activity. Instead of acknowledging the reversal, the board's framing it as a clarification of the policy described in an April 17th bulletin that said, quote, a marijuana licensee in the state of Washington cannot have any sign or advertisement at any event if the event is located at or within 1,000 feet of one of the listed restricted areas, which include public parks. HempFest, which is scheduled for August 16th through the 18th, and in recent years has attracted about 100,000 people, though in the past it had reached about 250,000, is held in Seattle's waterfront Myrtle Edwards Park and Centennial Park. In their June 4th lawsuit challenging the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Control Board's decree, the event's organizers complained that the new sign rule had made cannabis businesses reluctant to participate in the Seattle Hemp Fest. The WSLCB said in a bulletin published this Wednesday, quote, after hearing from and working with stakeholders in the licensee community, the board understood that Bulletin 1901 did not fully answer all of the licensees' questions and raised some additional concerns. So they decided to allow Seattle Hemp Fest booths to put up banners. Seattle Hemp Fest Director Vivian McPeak welcomed the board's shift. He said, quote, we applaud the Attorney General's office for observing the free speech of licensed cannabis businesses to engage in non-commercial messaging at public events. He said, we look forward to hosting those businesses as sponsors or vendors at the Hemp Fest this year, and we invite their participation at the festival, end quote. Out of New York City, more than 6 in 10 U.S. adults believe that the personal use of cannabis ought to be legal in every state in the country, according to nationwide polling data compiled by SurveyMonkey and the news portal Axios. 63% of respondents said they support, quote, legalizing the recreational use of marijuana on a national level, end quote. 87% of the respondents said they support allowing adults to legally use marijuana for medical purposes. Both percentages are consistent with other recent national surveys. Though nearly 2/3 of respondents favored legalization, only about 1/4 of those surveys expressed an interest in using marijuana themselves. Also out of Washington, D.C., House Small Business Committee Chairman Nydia Velasquez, along with Representatives Gerald Golden and Dwight Evans, introduced a package of legislation to remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act and to extend several Small Business Administration initiatives to small businesses operating in the cannabis sector. Chairwoman Velasquez is now the first committee chair to ever introduce legislation that would end the federal prohibition. As this nascent industry begins to grow, federal policy should strive to reduce roadblocks for those qualified entrepreneurs who've historically been the targets, right here, under the criminalization of cannabis. Enterprising individuals who would benefit most from the critical resources that the Small Business Administration provides must not be discriminated against as a matter of principled fairness and opportunity. At the time of introduction, Chairwoman Velasquez said, quote, "As our society continues to move the needle on this issue, we must recognize that legal cannabis businesses, often small businesses that fuel local economies and create new jobs. That's why I'm pleased to introduce legislation to extend affordable lending options to small businesses that operate in the cannabis space while simultaneously recognizing the structural disadvantages facing entrepreneurs from communities of color," end quote. This legislative package is introduced on the heels of a Committee on Small Business hearing, which discussed the positive impact that the Small Business Administration could have if it were able to engage with small businesses in the rapidly growing state legal cannabis marketplaces. 33 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. territories of Guam and Puerto Rico have enacted legislation specific to physician-authorized use of cannabis. Moreover, an estimated 73 million Americans now reside in 10 states where anyone over the age of 21 may possess cannabis legally. An additional 13 states have passed laws specific to the possession of CBD or cannabidiol oil for therapeutic purposes. To date, these regulatory programs are operating largely as voters and politicians intended. The enactment of these policies have not negatively impacted workplace safety, crime rates, traffic safety, or youth use patterns. They stimulated economic development and created hundreds of millions of dollars in new tax revenue. Specifically, a 2019 report estimates that over 211,000 Americans are now working full-time in the cannabis industry. Tax revenue from Colorado, Oregon, and Washington now exceed initial projections. Further, numerous studies have identified an association between cannabis access and lower rates of opioid use, abuse, hospitalizations, and mortality. Our next story is from the great Northeast. Maine's Democratic Governor Janet Mills on Thursday signed legislation finalizing regulations governing the licensed production and retail sale of cannabis to adults. With the passage of the new rules, it's estimated that marijuana retailers may be operational in Maine by March of 2020. Under the rules, commercial licensees will initially, until 2021, be granted only to state residents. State employees, active members of law enforcement, those with felony drug convictions, and those who've been denied licenses in other states are ineligible to participate in the retail cannabis industry in Maine. The regulations impose limits with regard to THC content and the appearance of cannabis-infused edible products. Retailers will not be permitted to sell customers more than 2.5 ounces of usable marijuana or 5 grams of concentrate in a single day. Maine's retailers will need to first receive local approval prior to applying for a state operator's license. Maine voters initially approved the legalization of cannabis in November 2016, but lawmakers, led by former Republican Governor Paul LePage, repeatedly took steps to delay the law's implementation. The new Democratic Governor Mills has previously signed legislation in Maine into law this session explicitly permitting the retail sales of hemp-derived CBD products and allowing those with out-of-state medical cannabis registration cards to access Maine's existing dispensaries. Next story is from Israel. The administration of herbal cannabis is safe and effective in patients diagnosed with fibromyalgia, according to clinical data published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. Israeli investigators assessed the use of cannabis over a 6-month period in 211 patients with the disease. 81% of the subjects reported, quote, at least moderate improvement in their condition without experiencing serious adverse events, end quote. Patients were most likely to report overall reductions in pain and overall improvements in their quality of life following cannabis therapy. 22% of the subjects stopped or reduced their dosage of opioids, and 20% reduced their use of benzodiazepines, findings that are consistent with those of other studies. The authors concluded, in the present study, we demonstrated that medical cannabis is an effective and safe option for treatment of fibromyalgia patients and their symptoms. Considering the low rates of addiction and serious adverse effects, especially compared to opioids, cannabis therapy should be considered to ease the symptom burdens among those fibromyalgia patients who are not responding to standard care. Future studies should aim to compare medical cannabis to standard therapy of fibromyalgia to establish their proper place of cannabis in fibromyalgia therapeutics arsenal. This study, Safety and Efficacy of Medical Cannabis in Fibromyalgia, appears in this month's Journal of Clinical Medicine. That's the end of our hemp news segment for tonight, and we'll be right back after this brief musical interlude from the tour with John Trudell, Hemp is Earth Medicine, that we did back in 2011. This is Grass Fire.
Void between freedom and free, dealing with the unnatural reality. A need to be, a need to see. Grass fire by DNA needs THC.
That's the way this fire burns. It's a grass fire.
In the unnatural society, been trying to maintain, while the sane appear to be clearly insane, with no way to explain, outlasting the great law. A sparking spark does my mind, grass fire, pulling the sky, breathing in sativa's design.
Grass fire in a world that yearns. That's the way this fire burns. It's a grass fire.
The void between freedom and free, dealing with the unnatural reality, a need to be, a need to see. Grass fire, my DNA needs THC. Dreaming of long times past and all that those times brought. Looking to the heart of tomorrow. Grass fire in a world that yearns. That's the way these fires burn.
Grass fire.
Hey, Lanny, welcome
Paul,
back.
Thank you for having me here.
Hey, thanks for doing it. Thanks for helping get our show started back in 1996.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. I know you were already producing several other shows here in Portland,
Yeah.
and I had people say, if you ever can, because I've been on other people's show several times. Maybe I was on one of your shows.
Sure you were.
I don't, and so I remember we produced a show first in your first club, the City Club, I
City
believe.
Club, yeah, we were producing a show there called Night Scene, which was kind of a gay nightline type show,
Right,
with
right.
entertainment and guest speakers. In fact, Gregory Franklin has been compiling all the past shows, over 400, and they're being combined into one big thing there, being turned over to the Gay and Lesbian Archives, because it just chronicles so much of the history of
But
what
you
went
had
on in
another
Portland.
show too, not
Oh,
just
God,
Night
yes.
Scene.
Well, you know, I
You
had
had
a
like
club. I had a club.
4
I
other
operated.
shows.
Yes, and that was. I had a club I operated. It was called the City Night Club. It was aimed at gay and lesbian youth, and as part of it, I had these shows that I produced for Portland Cable Access. And the first one was Night Scene, which was a gay show. Then we came along with Outrageous, which was the shows that the young people would put on the performances there, and drag and all this.
So
kind
you'd
of stuff.
record other people's
And
performances.
then we did Cannabis Common Sense, which was
Yeah.
about legalizing marijuana. And then we did a show called Bunk Busters, which was about atheism.
Right.
And so here I was producing 4 shows every week. And it was all these young people. And what were the shows about? It was about being why it's okay to be gay, why it's okay to smoke pot, and why it's okay to say, hey, there's no such thing as God. And I was pretty controversial in the community for producing all these shows with all these young people. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was. It was. It's got us going.
It got everybody going. Let me
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons the police came after me. But that's only one of the reasons.
Yeah.
They had multiple reasons why they wanted
I remember that. I remember it was the folks that were in charge of the marijuana enforcement team that had the press conference announcing they were coming after you. But you got all of that thrown out, thank God.
Well, it wasn't the marijuana enforcement team. It was
Drugs and Vice.
Drugs and Vice.
But the person who announced it was the marijuana
Yeah.
enforcement
Yeah.
team leader. And so I think the fact that we were recording our show in your club had
But
something to do with
they
it.
they never pressed charges, never anything to press charges against.
They just had you on the front page of the newspaper,
Oh,
making you look like.
that was really crazy because they went after claiming. Well, it's a long story.
Let's not
I don't
go
wanna
into that
go
story.
it.
Let's
Oh,
not go into
that's
that story
a
right
long
now.
story. But if you
We-
want to know personally, give me a call. I'll tell you all about it.
How can people reach you if they want to reach you?
Well, there's you can reach me through Lanny at marijuananews.org, LANNY at marijuananews.org. You can call me at 760-799-2055.
Okay.
You can become a subscribe to my newsletter at marijuananews.org. And most importantly, you can learn all about the Brownie Mary Democrats of California, which is part of the California Democratic Party. And this is what I learned. When I moved down to California, I got involved with the THCF Medical Clinic. You asked me to open up a clinic in Riverside.
And we did, and it operated for what, about 8 years or
About
so?
8 years, but after I'd been operating that for a couple of years, people were complaining that they had passed Senate Bill 420, which allowed collectives.
They keep naming these marijuana bills 420.
They
Imagine
said it
that.
was just a coincidence.
Right.
And like the sun's coming up in the east tomorrow, in the west tomorrow. And it allowed people to associate collectively and cooperating to distribute marijuana. And so these places, there was hardly any opened up. So I helped open one.
Next door to our
one up,
clinic
yeah.
there in Riverside.
And we immediately got sued by the city of Riverside that we couldn't do that they had the right to close us down. At that time, we didn't know that it wasn't the set in law. That
It hadn't been adjudicated through the courts yet.
And just by the luck of the draw, out of the hundreds and hundreds of collectives in the state of California, the collective I was associated with went all the way to the California Supreme Court with the horrible decision that cities could ban collectives and cooperatives under their zoning ordinances.
For medical marijuana.
This is medical marijuana. But that Senate Bill 420 didn't apply, allowed them to do that, and Proposition 215 allowed them to do that, which legalized medical marijuana. And I watched this whole process, and I began to realize that we had a major problem in that we had no respect. When we went to talk to our state assembly members and our state senators or our congresspeople about marijuana, they would just practically, if they even talked to us, would just kind of laugh us out. We were a joke. And so I began to say, well, how in the world do we get involved politically? How can we do this? Because we had no political clout. So I began looking around, and I looked at the gay community because I was a member of the gay community, and the gay community had done a pretty good job. You know, I don't know who was lower on the ladder of social respectability. People who had sex with members of the same sex, or people who smoked pot.
We
But
were both subject to
pretty
criminal
low.
harassment.
But the gay community had worked.
Marijuana people were put in jail for a lot longer.
And they were put in lay, and but the thing is, the prohibition against gay people is thousands of years old. The prohibition against marijuana was only like 70 years old. So somehow, but the gay people though somehow had worked their way up the social ladder of respectability to the point where the President of the United States said, "Hey, I was wrong 4 years ago. I think gay people should be able to
But
get
you
married."
started the Brownie Mary clubs as part of the California Democratic Party before Obama switched, didn't you?
No,
you didn't. Oh, okay.
No. And
So when did you start the Brownie Mary? 2012. Okay, so that was about the same
It
time.
was just about the same time, but I modeled us after the gay community, and I looked at how they did it, and what they did was they started in the local level at the county central committees. So I went to the Riverside County Democratic Central Committee and says, I want to form a cannabis club, because that's what you do. There's an African American club, and there's an environmental club, and there's a labor club. You form a club for your interest. And they said, sure, go ahead, form a club. And so I was going to name it the Cannabis Club, Cannabis Democratic Club. And several people, they said, oh no, you can't do that. You can't name a club after a Schedule I drug. And I said, okay, I was kind of a little pissed at that. And I said, well, I looked at the gay community again. And they didn't name it, the Gay Democratic Club or the Lesbian Democratic Club. They named it after a famous person, or like Harvey Milk, or a famous event like Stonewall Democratic Club. So I decided I was going to name it after a famous person. First person I thought of was Bob Marley. Bob Marley Democratic Club.
He's not American, though.
Well, the thing is, I began thinking dreadlocks. This is not the image we want to purvey. So then I was going to name it after Dennis Perone. Dennis Perone was the father of medical marijuana in California.
Yeah.
He represented
One of my mentors, I must add.
Proposition 215. But I knew Dennis.
Yeah.
I knew Dennis really well. I knew the minute we did something he didn't like, he'd be on the phone saying, Lanny, take my name off that club. So I decided.
Unfortunately, he's passed on.
Yes,
now.
he did. And so I looked around what I could do, and I came across Mary Jane Rathbun. Mary Jane Rathbun had the moniker of Brownie Mary because when in the 70s, when she was in her 70s, during the 80s, she began baking marijuana-infused brownies, taking them to AIDS patients in San Francisco hospitals. She got arrested 3 times for it, never prosecuted. Eventually named a day in her honor. But I began to recognize there's 2 really good reasons to name it after her. One is that Brownie Mary, it shows how important marijuana is, because it was just a lifesaver for the AIDS patients that she was taking them to. But yet, Brownie Mary, it's kind of fun, and cannabis is fun. That's one of its important aspects. But also, this is a male-dominated movement. We have to highlight the contributions made by women to the marijuana movement, and that's why I named it after Brownie Mary.
Yeah.
And,
Brownie Mary, God bless her soul. She, someone bless her anyway. I know you're at the Atheist Show, and I'm not.
You can bless her.
I can bless her myself. But she passed away in the early 90s.
Right.
She continued to be shown on TV as the face of medical marijuana until recently, until about 2015 or so. You'd see her smoking a joint as the roll-in.
So Brownie Mary Democrats eventually, from the first club I started, eventually became a state-chartered organization. We're one of only 7 statewide Democratic organizations actually chartered by the California Democratic Party. We are part of the party. In 2014, we introduced a plank to the party's platform calling for the party to support the legalization of marijuana. For the first time, the party actually supported the legalization. This was now the nation's largest state political party supporting the legalization of marijuana. When 2016 came around and Proposition 64 was on the ballot, the party went ahead and strongly supported Proposition 64. I really believe it was support of the Democratic Party is why it passed, certainly why it passed overwhelmingly.
And your work with the Brownie Mary Club.
And I would like to present you with a Brownie Mary Democratic Club button.
All right.
It says
There it
Legalize
is.
2016 on
I don't
it.
know if we can close in on it.
It's I tell people to save that button because in 20, 30 years it's going to be worth a lot of money on eBay.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'd save it anyway.
And we're continuing to
Go
work
in our
with
museum.
and we're continuing to work with the Democratic Party to enforce
Yeah.
Proposition 64, which is having all kinds of problems in California because once again, when they wrote 64, they did this. They caved in to the forces about local control.
Right,
And it
right.
says right in 64 that local government can ban
And you
the
have to
sales.
live in San Bernardino County or
No,
whatever.
I live in Riverside
Riverside
County,
County.
which has changed. But unfortunately, in 2/3 of the state, 2/3 of the city, 2/3 of the counties still prohibit any kind of manufacture, cultivation, and distribution of commercial marijuana. And the state is not taking in anywhere near as much money as they thought they were going to take in because so much of it's banned. And they keep talking about, the Proposition 64 is help the black market just explode. Nonsense. The black market was always really big in California.
You know, we do take viewer phone calls, and there's a microphone in the studio if the audience has any questions for us. If you're out there and you have a question for Lanny or myself, you can call us at 503-288-4442. That's 503-288-4442. We also have a little video that we're going to roll in of, it's about a minute, of another California pioneer, Dr. Todd McCurry, at the Portland Hempstock Festival back in 2006. We'll be right back.
I myself am a medical cannabis user, and once upon a time I was with the federal government. I was in charge of the marijuana research project for the National Institute of Mental Health until they discovered what my attitudes were on the product. And I was cast out from the federal government, and I went to California where I started my practice in psychiatry. There I participated in different cannabis reform activities. I was on the steering committee of Proposition 19. Back in 1972, the California Marijuana Initiative.
Dr. Todd McCurry, who was one of the original pioneers, the first medical marijuana doctor in the United States. He published a book about medical marijuana, compilation. Hey, they're telling me we should change your mic. Can you switch out for the mic down below?
There's no other
And
mic
so
here.
I want to tell you that if you're out there and you are looking for a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana permit, we have doctors we can refer you to all over the United States. You can call us anytime at 503-235-4606. That number there, 503-235-4606. If you or a loved one need help finding a physician who can help you with medical marijuana, with any of those conditions, anywhere in the USA, call us at 503-235-4606. Okay, you switched out your microphone. You're an expert on that.
On what?
On switching microphones and
Yes.
video and all of that stuff. You helped start our show.
I haven't done video in ages.
Now-
I miss it.
Well, you do a video, though. You've done some videos in the past, and you did your own. When you went to California, you started a show too.
I did? Oh,
Did
yes,
you?
that's
Yeah,
right.
medical
That's right. I haven't done it in years, but yeah, it was called Marijuana, Compassion, and Common Sense.
Uh-huh.
And it was on for about 3 or 4 years on cable access. But nothing like your show, Paul.
Well, you did the first 125
All right.
episodes
Still,
of this
it's
show.
nothing
We
like your
couldn't
show.
have gone
I'm
for.
just amazed that you're still doing this.
Yeah, 23 years later, we're still plugging away. Thank you. In fact, we have a little bit of video, I think. Is the next video ready to roll? Let's see if we'll be right back after this.
It's time for Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells you the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition. And now here's the host of the show, Paul Stanford.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. You may know that our
So that was at the Rave Club. You heard your voice
Yes.
introduced. You couldn't really hear it and hear too well that time.
yeah.
But we have another video of your first season of Marijuana, Compassion, and Common Sense, right?
The show I did in California?
The show you did in California. I think, are they ready to roll that one now? We'll be right back.
Don't touch that remote control because you're on the show that you've been wanting to see. It's Marijuana, Compassion and Common Sense, the show that tells you the truth about marijuana, the facts about medical marijuana, and gives you information on the politics and the legal issues surrounding marijuana so you can learn how you can access this incredible herb that could be of such benefit to you, your health, and for medical reasons. Good evening. My name's Lanny Swerdlow, and I'm director of the Marijuana Anti-Prohibition Project. We are a patient support group and a law reform organization located in the Inland Empire. We have 2 meetings every month. We have a meeting on the first Sunday of every month at 3 p.m. at the Cathedral City Public Library. And in the High Desert, we have a meeting on the second Wednesday of every month at 7:30 p.m. at the Joshua Tree Community Center. We'll give you a little more information about those meetings.
Okay. Well, you can see a strong resemblance between
Yes.
that 1997 show and I think that other one was like
I
2005 or
can't
something.
come up with anything original, can
It
I?
was no, you came up with it, but you
I know.
there
I
was
came up
no
with one
reason to
idea.
change something
I'm a-
that was
I'm a one-trick
perfected
pony. That's the
here
trouble,
in.
yeah.
Well, I don't know. You got all these different shows. Well, now you're still working with the Brownie Mary Club,
Yeah,
though,
I'm working with
and you're
the
working in
California
the. You
Democratic
just
Party.
had the state
We had
Democratic
the
Party
State
convention.
Democratic Convention. This is the brochure. We had a booth there, and we distributed 4,000 brochures to every single delegate that came to the convention. It was very exciting. They had 14 of the 20 Democratic presidential contenders were there. Not one of them mentioned anything about cannabis, though. You know, I was noticing, it was interesting, in the last night's debate on the thing, the only one that mentioned, of all people, was John Hickenlooper.
Yeah, and he opposed it.
And he opposed it, but now he was talking about how
He did it.
He
He was
legalized
claiming credit
Yeah,
for
he
it.
was-
I saw that.
And he talks about, what's really interesting, he talks about Colorado was doing so well. The last 3 years, business has been just booming. And I want to ask him how much he could attribute that to the fact that cannabis has been legalized in Colorado. You know, I remember when it first happened in Colorado.
Yeah, it's amazing since he opposed
He
it.
opposed
you know?
it. And I remember reading
Claim
about the
credit.
ski season, and the ski season that first year in Utah was very poor, but it was booming in Colorado because all these people were coming to Colorado to go skiing. And
in Washington State, too.
Washington State, too, yeah.
Another governor who's running for president.
Not
You know,
to
there's
mention-
so many people running for president.
And one of the interesting I've read about cannabis in Colorado also is that the arrest rate had been, before it was made legal, they were arresting over 80,000 people a year in Colorado. Last year, the year before, it had dropped down to less than 2,000 people. And I wanted to call a reporter for the Denver Post and suggest a story to them that they contact the police department and ask them, what are they doing? What are the police doing with the 78,000 arrests they don't have to make anymore? That gives them a lot of time. What are they doing? They haven't fired anybody. What are they doing with all their free time now?
Hopefully they're arresting people who hurt people instead of us.
They're probably eating donuts.
Yeah, they're pretty famous for that. Well, you know, last night your state's Kamala Harris did pretty well in the debate. You know, I think she threw former Vice President Joe Biden under the busing on the busing issue.
I'm just wondering when they're going to start talking. They haven't talked about criminal justice reform very much.
No, they
and
haven't.
Kamala Harris was a prosecutor. She put a lot of people in
And
jail.
she opposed marijuana legalization
Yes, she
too.
did.
Now she's seen the light, and she says it brings joy to people, and that we need more joy in the world.
Well,
I agree with that.
You know,
I'm happy to see that she's changed her mind.
Yeah.
But she opposed us.
That's
She
right.
put us in jail,
And-
and you know, and
And I wonder if Biden is going to drag that out, because Biden was the one that was the
Biden
author
put
of
us
the
in jail.
criminal justice
Yeah.
laws and all this kind of
the
stuff.
mandatory
They're-
minimums that
they're all evil.
many people are still in jail on marijuana crimes under
Yeah.
Biden's
There's-
past laws.
But they're, you know, at least even Biden doesn't believe now that marijuana should be illegal. He's recently talked about making it a class 2. I mean, Schedule 2 on the control, which is ridiculous. It shouldn't be in the Controlled Substance Act at all.
Yeah, which is what the new law that was just introduced.
And the
in-
Criminal Justice Reform Act,
Yeah.
the Marijuana Justice Act,
Yeah, the
will
Marijuana
also
Justice
pull
Act.
it out of the
There's a few of
the Controlled Substance Act,
Which is the best thing. I mean,
Absolutely.
the banking bill that's just passed one house would implement laws that permanently that make cannabis a special class that needs to be overregulated.
And if you
we
took it out-
decriminalize, I mean deregulate it, deschedule it.
Deschedule it. That would
Yeah.
end. That would solve the entire problem.
Yeah.
Because the federal government is no longer prohibiting.
And that's the
marijuana.
way it should be.
Absolutely.
Because it's safe and
We don't have alcohol,
no
we
one's
don't-
ever died from marijuana.
We don't have alcohol, we don't have tobacco, we don't have caffeine in the Controlled Substances Act. We certainly should not have cannabis.
You know,
in the Controlled
speaking of
Substances Act.
historical use of cannabis, I'm going to run through a little show and tell with you here, Lanny. This is Seabury and Johnson corn plasters. This is the predecessor of Johnson and Johnson. Johnson and Johnson had a number of cannabis medicines. Right next door, we have a full bottle, maybe back out a little bit. We have a full bottle of a cannabis cough syrup. Let's see if they can focus in on that. This is chloroform and cannabis. And as you can see, it's still full. It's got a lid firmly attached. Right next to that, we have, this is about an ounce of cannabis flower, and this is from Park Davis of Detroit. You can see it right there on the label. Right next to it is another Park Davis product. This is Park Davis capsules. I mean, not capsules, but pills. You can see there are some pills in here as well. And so this one is cannabis indica pills. This next one is cannabis nerve tonic, also from Park Davis. All of these products are between 1890 and 1920. This one is an 1880 cannabis bottle, also from Park Davis. This is powdered extract of cannabis. This was hashish, basically. It was our keef. It was a powdered form of hashish. Right next to it, we have the same thing, powdered extract of cannabis. This one's a little newer. It's got a screw top bottle, and it's 1920 circa from Eli Lilly. And this is an 1880 bottle, also from Eli Lilly, an extract of cannabis. And it's got a nice label on the back that talks about how it's used to help people get off opiates, chloroform, cocaine, and alcohol. And then this is another one from Upjohn. So all of these are existing companies that are still around today.
You know, the most common form that was found in almost every American medicine cabinet was tincture of cannabis.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was used for insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever grandma couldn't get to sleep and was pacing the floor, she'd take a couple drops under her tongue, sublingually, and crawl back in bed with grandpa and get a good night's sleep. And what a crime that people had to turn to Ambien and to Lunestra and this kind of stuff to get a good night's sleep with all its negative side effects.
The people who brought us marijuana prohibition were lying, obviously. It was based on racist lies, hence the racist name marijuana instead of cannabis. They called it cannabis or hemp. They never could have prohibited it. Our late friend, the Kentucky lawyer Gatewood Galbraith, always said it was the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, elite, fascist sons of a bitches who brought us marijuana prohibition. And they was the synthetic cycle versus the natural cycle. And hemp represented the most productive part of the natural cycle. Here we have hemp oil, our hemp flame of freedom that's been on this show continuously for the past 11 years. A little bit of hemp fiber. Here's next week's wick for, not next week, but when we come back. And then some hempcrete. So that's an ancient product that's being renewed. It's stronger than concrete, but made with hemp and powdered limestone. So there's show and tell. So what else do you think about the breakdown of the party in the Brownie Mary Club in California in the presidential election?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that this will become something of an issue. They haven't talked about it yet, but this is a major issue. Mm-hmm. And it's the fact that it was totally ignored in 2016. It will probably be totally ignored in 2020. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if it ever.
Do you think Trump will try to steal the issue and gain voter favor?
Here's the thing: in 2019,
I'm afraid of that.
In 2019, we really have the possibility that we can end federal marijuana prohibition. We have the Marijuana Justice Act. There's this other act you're talking, all of which, if it passes, would remove cannabis from the Controlled Substance Act, which ends it. And the problem has always been that until the Democrats took control of Congress in 2018, the Republicans were in control. There was a guy named Jeff Sessions, not Jeff Sessions.
The former Attorney General William
No,
Barr is the Attorney General.
No, not Jeff Sessions. Another Pete Sessions. Pete Sessions.
Oh yeah, the
he
Dallas
was, he
Congressman.
was head of the House
Judiciary.
Judiciary Committee. No, it was the wasn't the Judiciary. He was head of one of the committees that
It was criminal justice. Or
criminal
something.
every bill had to go through that committee to get to the floor, and he would not allow any single bill that had anything to do with marijuana ever to get to the floor to the House for the vote. And if it did get to the floor to the vote, it would pass because 90% of the Democrats would vote in favor of it. About a third of the Republicans would vote in favor of it, and this is why the bill that went through every year that we said the Department of Justice could not use any money to enforce marijuana prohibition laws in states that had legalized it with state regulation. That passed every year because that bypassed his committee. But every other bill went through his committee and he wouldn't let it get to the floor. And we have a new person, McGovern, who has taken over from Boston. Now the Democrats control, and he's in charge of this committee. And he says that every single bill that gets to that committee will pass and go to the floor. So once this bill passes and goes to the floor, and there is bills going right now that just passed the legislation, it will go to the Senate. The problem is going to be in the Senate is Mitch McConnell going to block the bill from getting there. An example, though, what might happen, it was the First Step Act. The First Step Act was this major first criminal justice reform act, and when it was introduced in the last Congress, McConnell said, oh no, we don't have enough time to get it passed, we're going to have to put it off until 2019. Fortunately, there was such a stink raised about it that he had no choice but to let it go to the floor of the Senate where it passed and where it was signed by Trump. And Trump touts this. You'll hear, oh, we passed criminal justice reform while I was president. And he's taking all the credit for it and this kind of stuff. Whenever he talks to...
He's just dying to take credit for marijuana legalization.
That's right. And so I believe if the House passes the bill, it goes to the Senate, they overcome McConnell, and it
Or
passes
McConnell
the
might
Senate.
go along.
He might go
if they
along.
think
Who
they'll
knows?
win votes.
Yeah, and the reason
They'll do the political calculation.
Exactly, because in 2020, in 2018, the Senate was against the Democrats. There was like 26 Democratic seats up for election and only like 8 Republican. So the Democrats were in really danger of losing.
They were exposed.
And they were exposed. They did wind up losing, but only 2. But in 2020, it's just the opposite. There's 20 Republican Senate seats up for grabs and only 12 Democrats. And if this issue is an issue, these Republican senators might be said, hey, you voted not to allow marijuana to be legalized. So if it goes to McConnell and they do pass in the Senate and it goes to Trump, I believe he sent it. So there is a real possibility we could end federal marijuana prohibition in 2019. It remains to be seen what happens over the next few months.
We'll see.
Don't hold your breath.
We have a little video promo for an upcoming conference. I think it's the 4th annual Cannabis Science Conference. It's coming up in September. We'll be back in just a minute.
I think that this Cannabis Science Conference is the best because, again, it affords you an opportunity to learn something. If you're open enough to want to absorb it, you can walk away out of here being enriched and ready to actually do what it is you think you want to do, and that's get involved in this business.
This is my favorite event, hands down. The Cannabis Science Conference has been a conference that I've been involved with since day one.
I have yet to find somebody who's not completely passionate about this plant and the good that it can do.
So I would say if you're interested in cannabis, and whether you're a patient, you're a medical provider, a researcher, a cultivator, we have something here for you.
It has been wonderful how we can come together and really just connect and be able to build on something much more than any sole person could ever do.
You know what I would like to kind of mention here that's really interesting is what's happening with the surplus of cannabis. You know, the major problem that people that I talk to nowadays, back when we first started the medical marijuana thing, all the patients I work with are saying that major problem was they couldn't find any. Nobody has any problem of finding marijuana now. The problem I get from people is they cannot afford all they need. The price is still too high. and we've got to get the price down. And yet
Here in
we've got this-
Oregon, you can buy ounces for under $50
Right,
at a
the
number of
prices-
dispensaries.
Yeah, but its prices finally come down. And what's interesting?
Some of the growers are selling it as low as 100, 150 a pound to
There you go.
the stores.
Oh, I like that. That's
Yeah. Well, that's allowing them to sell $30 ounces.
Right. So and finally, the price is coming down, and this is one of the great things that legalization has brought about. It's brought it. But what's interesting?
There's a surplus here in Oregon. They say that it's almost 7 years of inventory compared to last year's sale. The problem being that as it sits there, it degrades a little bit. The more if it's stored in nitrogen, it won't degrade nearly as fast.
Yeah,
but
how many
the
people store it in
terpenes
nitrogen?
dissipate, so it loses its smell and flavor.
In California, the Bureau of Cannabis Control contracted with the California Department of Agriculture to do a study on how much California produces and how much California consumes. And the study found out that California consumes 2.6 million pounds of cannabis every single year. And the state produces 13.5 million pounds of cannabis every year. So most of that crop is going out of state. It's just illegal. That's what happens to it. California provides the nation with so much of its food basket, and it also provides so much to the nation with its cannabis products too. And the thing is, what's interesting, we're doing it, and we're not growing it where it belongs to be grown. It's still being grown in Northern Triangle and all this kind of stuff, and Del Norte and Humboldt County and Trinity County. And you know, that's not a great place to grow marijuana. They grow marijuana there because all the coverage makes it difficult for the DEA and the helicopters to see it. It should be grown in the Central Valley. It should be grown in Imperial, where they grow all the other crops, and you can grow great quantities of marijuana, and the price should even plummet more than it is now. There is no reason. You say they're selling marijuana for $150 a pound. Could you name a single plant out there that in its raw state sells for $150 a pound? No. Nothing.
Takes a lot of care, a lot of drying.
It doesn't take that. Look, if you can sell coffee, which is grown far away, labor-intensive crop, got to be brought up here. It's got to be processed, and you can sell $15 a pound for good quality coffee in the store. You should be able to sell marijuana for $15
I can tell you,
a pound.
having been to, I agree. For bringing back the $10 ounce, which is what it was when I was a kid. But
$10 an ounce is still $160 a pound.
Well, you know, in Colombia, where I go and speak annually at Expo Medellin in Medellin, Colombia, and have been judged the Cup of Gold or Copa del Rey. They have cannabis at about $5 a pound.
There you go.
$7 a kilo. It's very inexpensive, and it's grown in the mountains. And there, the light cycle, it's at the equator.
Yeah.
So it's always 12 hours of light and 12 hours a day. So they automatically, the plants will start to flower. And so what growers there do, so they have to have lower number of plants, is they'll put out a bunch of fluorescent lights to stop it from flowering and increase the photocycle. And then when they turn the lights off, it's always at 12:12, and the flowers start to bud.
Well, that's $5 a pound is what. You know, I've often talked about, people ask me, what is your ultimate goal? My ultimate goal is for cannabis to be sold at Costco.
Mm-hmm. I want to drive my car on this, hemp seed fuel.
Yeah, and the reason I say I want it at Costco is because if you can buy it at Costco, you know it's going to be good quality, it's going to be reasonably priced. Of course, you have to buy a kilogram at a time.
And Costco has not given us any money to say that.
But they'll be selling it. Listen, they're selling alcohol like crazy.
I bet they'll start selling CBD
tobacco.
soon.
And they'll once it becomes legal. Right now, they can't get a license.
Lanny, we are almost out of time. If people want to reach you, they should get their pencils or pens and some paper, or their cell phones or keyboards. And how can they reach you?
I'm not sure I want to reach myself, but if you want to reach me, phone number 760-799-2055, and my
Say that again.
760-799-2055, or send an email to Lanny, Lanny, at marijuana news, one word, marijuananews.org. If you are interested in getting involved politically with the Democratic Party, if you're interested in forming a Brownie Mary Democratic Club within your state political party, call me. I will tell you how to do it, and you can become part of it's really, let me tell you, it's fun to be part of the political process, because you get there and you get to meet all these politicians. I've met everybody from Nancy Pelosi to Governor Newsom to just all down the line. through there. It's very, very exciting.
And if you are looking for a doctor to help you get a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States, we have a referral service. If you have any of these conditions or know someone that does, call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. I want to thank you for coming on, Lanny.
My pleasure,
Hopefully
Paul.
we'll have you back up here sometime soon. It's a long drive, I know. We're going to go out with a little bit of music from Quiltman, honoring John Trudell. We'll be out with live shows for the next 2 weeks, but we'll be back in the middle of July because our studio closes down for the holidays, and boys and girls clubs have some classes here. But I want to thank you for watching. Tune in next week and help us restore him. Good night.
Good words, good thoughts, good action. Follow the sky into the blue. You are part sky, sky is part you. Oi, ah, oi, oi, ah, oi, oi, ah, eh, ah, ya, eh, you. Oi, ah, eh, ah, oi, ah, oi, oi, ah, oi, oi, ah, ah. Good words, good thoughts, good actions. Follow the sky into the blue. You are part sky, sky is part you. Hey, ah, hey, hey, ah, hey, hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, good words, good thoughts, good